Alright, hi. I'm Riccardo Campa. I'm a sociologist. I work at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. When first I came across the idea of radical life extension, eternal youth, rejuvenation, anti-aging therapies, I thought that this was a fantastic idea. That was my spontaneous reaction. Then I found out that most people were actually reacting hysterically to this idea. They thought it was a terrible idea. They thought that they preferred to get old, sick and die, as it always happened. They thought it was a bad idea to change it. I still understand believers, because if you believe, if you have a religion, you believe in life after death, you may still think that this life is not ideal, is not perfect. If you think that there is a perfect life waiting for you after that, I can still understand that you don't want to interfere with your physiological processes and change it. Still, I was meeting many people that were actually atheists, and they still thought that it was a bad idea, and they still thought that it was better to die, get old and die. So this was quite interesting for me as a sociologist, because you could see a polarization of the response, and this polarization of the response is a sign that there is kind of cultural dissonance in our modern Western societies. Because then I found out that this was not only a problem of Europe, but also a problem in the United States of America, in Canada, in Australia, in other countries, in the Western world, at least. So let's try to analyze the problem from an historical and sociological point of view, to understand why this happens or what is going on. Let's take as a definition of eternal youth or radical life extension the definition that was provided by a famous book talking about ending aging by Over Gray and Michael Ray, the rejuvenation breakthrough that could reverse human aging in our lifetime. If you turn the book and you read back over, you will read this sentence: people alive today could live to be 1,000 years old. So this is more or less the idea we are discussing. Would you like to live 1,000 years old, being always 25, for instance, like in the movie In Time? I don't know if you saw this movie, a bit dystopian, but gives the idea. Would you like that? I would obviously say yes, that's fantastic. I just hate this idea of my body falling apart and living 70, 80, maybe 90 years in these conditions. 1,000 years, 25 years old would be fantastic. As I told you before, the reaction of many people is quite different. But if we take the perspective of the history of ideas, we find out that actually people of the past seems to think the way I think, and the way other, let's call them transhumanist things. I'm using this term, which is not obviously accepted by everybody. But again, if we go back in history, for instance, we go back to Sumer, we can find the oldest known literary work, talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh was actually trying to find a solution for death and aging. He thought obviously this was a goal, trying to be forever young and immortal. He didn't manage, so the story is quite dramatic, but still this is taken as a value. This is a postulate. There is no even discussion why this should be better. than dying. Again, if we read the Genesis, so we read the Bible, we find out that eternal life is a value. And actually, Adam and Eve losing eternal life, they lose eternal life as a punishment. So it's a punishment, the condemnation to death. And here we find the record man, Methuselah, that lived 969 years and then he dies. So here we have this idea, why 1000 years, that we find also in this book by Over the Grey, probably comes from the Bible. Then we find also in Greek mythology this idea of the Golden Age, an age when people were not dying and they were young forever. Or actually, people were dying in the Golden Age. They were always young, they didn't get sick, and they were dying by night, so without suffering. But still you have this idea of eternal youth. And here we have like the works of Hesiod, or so for instance Works and Day, the myth of Prometheus and Pandora, and the myth of the Golden Age. In the Middle Age we have alchemy, and alchemists were trying to find out the secret of eternal life again, and they were assuming that this was a positive achievement, it was a value. We find, for instance, the works by Roger Bacon, and here I want to quote Roger Bacon, who wrote, "The possibility of prolongation of life is confirmed by this, that man is naturally immortal, that he is able not to die. And even after he had seen he could live near 1000 years, afterward by little and little the length of his life was abbreviated." So he is also referring, of course, to the Bible, because we are in a Christian era, the Middle Age. But still, he thinks that the solution could be scientific or technological. Because he wrote, "Therefore, it must needs be that this abbreviation is accidental. Therefore, it might be either wholly repaired or at least in part." Then we find the scientific revolution. And here we find another famous scientist and philosopher, Francis Bacon. And among his many works, we find the New Atlantis, where again we have an utopian novel. It was published in 1627, where death was defeated and aging was defeated. So this was seen as a utopian scenario, a positive scenario, something that we should try to achieve thanks to science and technology. And then we find the Enlightenment. And during the Enlightenment we have, for instance, Nicolas de Condorcet, who was a French mathematician, a philosopher, an economist, a revolutionary politician. And he is mainly known because he elaborated the idea of progress. Basically, he also thought that we could achieve extreme life extension thanks to science and medicine and knowledge. And again, this was seen as a positive outcome of progress in human history. Then in the 20th century, 19th century, 20th century, we have the Industrial Revolution. And here I could give another example. If we read the works by the Italian futurists, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti especially, the founder of the movement, we would find in his manifestos many statements in which he's presenting the idea of eternal youth as a positive thing, something that could achieve by merging humans and machines, for instance, and immortality as well. Then we have the 21st century. Here we know we lost a little bit of confidence in science and technology because this was used in the First World War and the Second World War to destroy life and our cities. But therefore there was the environment. So we started having doubting about science and its possibilities. And here I want to quote again Aubrey de Grey, because he writes this very interesting sentence in his book Ending Aging. The prospect of eventually being able to combat aging as well as we can currently combat most infectious diseases, essentially to eliminate aging as a cause of death, in other words, strikes terror into most people. That's what I said before. This is something that many scientists, engineers, transhumanist activists experienced in their life. We saw terror in the eyes of these people when we were talking about this possibility. And people immediately raised the specter of, for instance, boredom. What can we do if we live 1,000 years or more, or a few hundred years? We get bored. Overpopulation. People immediately say the world will be overpopulated. We're going to destroy the environment. Immortal dictators. What if Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, or Benito Mussolini would be immortal? And then again, they were saying, what if this technology would be only accessed by the elite? So this is another possible problem, the elitarian access to eternal youth. Only people with money and capitalists will have it, and other people will not have it. Think about it. These ideas, they kind of make sense, and they need a response. The problem is that they are totally inconsistent from a logical point of view. But people propose them all together, one after the other. Think about it. If it's only for the rich, there is no overpopulation. Of course, personally, I prefer that this is for everybody, that there is free and easy access to everybody to this technology. But think about it. If it's only for the elite, there is no overpopulation. If you're not rich, you will not have it, and you don't get bored. So why do you care about it? Still, again, they present all these four and many others objections all together, and they make no sense. So the problem is that we shouldn't look for logic. This is an emotional reaction. It's an emotional reaction that then people try to rationalize. And again, I want to quote Aubrey de Grey here, because he said also, as I also think, now I'm not certainly saying that these objections are dumb, not at all. No, what shocks me is not that these concerns are raised, but the way they are raised. And this says the people who are totally rational and open to discourse on any other matter approach the topic of defeating aging with a resistance to debate that virtually defies description. I was also quite curious reading what religious people think about it. Again, I still think that if a religious person tell me, well, I don't want this technology, I think that our destiny is different, is another word. We may be convinced or not by this explanation, but it still makes sense. Still, by reading an encyclical by Joseph Ratzinger, so Benedict XVI, the Emeritus Pope, I read a very interesting statement. He wrote in this encyclical, do we really want this? To live eternally? Perhaps many people reject the faith today simply because they do not find the prospect of eternal life attractive. So it means that even priests, members of the church, of the Catholic Church in this case, they find difficult to have people following them because people don't want eternal life. I mean, the same problems that transhumanists, engineers, or scientists find when trying to promote the idea of eternal life and eternal youth, or at least extreme life extensions. The same problems are found by the priests. I mean, churches are empty because people don't want eternal life. But we saw that in the past that what most people wanted, and that's why religions were so strong and strongly rooted in society. In the past, here another quote by Joseph Ratzinger. What they desire, I mean people, is not eternal life at all, but this present life, for which faith in the eternal life seems something of an impediment. To live always without end, this, all things considered, can only be monotonous and ultimately unbearable. I mean, this is not his idea, he's telling what people think, according to his experience, his own experience. So we cannot be surprised that the Catholic Church turned it into a moral agency, in the sense that they're mostly talking about morality and the migrants and sexual life. They rarely talk about soteriology, life after death, metaphysics. Have you noticed that? They never touch the problem because they understood that this argument is no more convincing. So this means that our societies changed in a profound way, in a very deep way. And the question now is, and that's the question I ask myself as a sociologist, and I ask you, is our society affected by a spiritual disease that makes our inherited physical disease, in aging, acceptable or desirable? So which is the disease affecting our society? That's the question. Nihilism, I mean, we know that Friedrich Nietzsche was talking about nihilism as the outcome of Western history, for instance. Alienation, here we have Karl Marx, that is telling us, oh, people, they are just tools of a system exploiting them, so don't even possess the means of productions, they're just used. So maybe that's the reason why people think that living forever is absurd. If they just have to wake up in the morning and working for someone else until the evening and being exploited, living 1,000 years is not a positive prospect, a positive perspective. It's a nightmare. And then we have, for instance, Sigmund Freud talking about social neurosis. This could be another possible explanation. These three masters I'm mentioning now, Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud, they're called by Paul Ricoeur the masters of suspects. We know about this. Whatever is the explanation, I think that in order to convince people that life extension, eternal youth are good things, well, it's not enough to use scientific arguments to tell them it's really feasible. Here there is a social problem. There is a political problem behind it, in the sense that people will find acceptable and desirable being almost immortal, live 1,000 years or hundreds of years in health, when they will be convinced that life is a good thing. That's why I think scientists and engineers, they must understand that we have to help each other. They have to collaborate with social scientists and scholars from the humanities, and thinking that there are also these social and political dimensions of technical development that must be taken into account, into consideration. Without this, it would be difficult also for them to make their discoveries accepted. So this is my final conclusion. Again, yes, personally, I would love to live 1,000 years and be always 25. Still, I think that this requires not just an individual response, but social action. social action, having also an idea of society, not just an idea of individual life. Thank you for your attention.